Hello there. Welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, where I will welcome climatologist Dr. Michael Mann and parking garage owner and know-it-all Bill Boyle, Bill B in D.C. Thank you very much for pressing play. Thank you very much for listening and telling your friends. And thank you very much, especially to those of you who are paid subscribers of this podcast. It's only $5 a month, but thank you to all of those of you who pay more, including George Burns. A guy named George Burns, or goes by the name George Burns, just signed up to be a paid subscriber. You should too. And for all of those of you who are, I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. That's right, it's Thursday, and that means we hang out. Well, virtually that is, on Zoom. And tonight there is going to be a January 6th committee hearing at 8 Eastern, which is when we normally start the party, when we get down on Thursday nights. So let's meet earlier. Let's start at 7. Then we'll watch the hearings together, and we can talk and say things to each other on the chat. And if we must, we could open a mic on the Zoom. But tonight, I will see you at 7 for an hour to hang out before, and then we'll do a little watch party, watch the hearings together, because there's no way I'm missing them. I know many of you want to watch as well. So I'll see you tonight at 7 if you are a stand-up subscriber. If not, sign up now. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or standupwithpete.com. Great conversation with Bill. We talked a lot about those Secret Service texts. We talked about the January 6th hearing committee, and we spent a lot of time on Ukraine, and he's fired up and very, very salty. It made for a great interview. He follows and continues to follow what's going on there really closely, and we appreciate him for all of it. You're going to love that interview. But before that, you know, folks, it's hot outside. I know it sounded like I was starting to do a live read or an ad, but it is. It's hot. It's pretty hot here in the Northeast and throughout the country, and it's boiling as well in Western Europe and the UK, where they're not used to some of these temperatures. And so whenever the weather is extreme, it makes us think about the worst effects of climate change and how much more likely these scenarios are, how much more repetitive they will be. And so we pathetically reach out to climate scientists to talk about what man's role, what humans' role in this is, and what, if anything, can be done to prevent the worst effects. So I reached out to my good friend, Dr. Michael Mann, and what we did is we went live on Twitter, which is what I've been doing from time to time with guests, and he was great. We went live on Twitter yesterday, so if you're not following Dr. Mann, you should. It's Michael E. Mann on Twitter. Of course, I'm Matt Pete Dominic, and now I want to share with you my interview with him. It's about 15 minutes yesterday on Twitter Live. Of course, Michael Mann is a distinguished professor of atmospheric science, the director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State, National Academy of Science. He's won all kinds of awards. He's written several books. Most recently, a children's book, The Tantrum That Saved the World, went on sale last spring, and also The New Climate War. He's been at Penn State for a really long time, but he is headed to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, where he's going to start a whole new initiative there. Very excited to somehow work with him and be involved in talking about the media's role and component in educating folks about the most extreme effects of climate, sustainability, environmentalism, and so much more. So, Michael E. Mann and I going live, Dr. Mann on Twitter yesterday. Let's get it started. Dr. Michael Mann, we're live on Twitter. Thank you for saying yes to this craziness.
Thank you. It is my pleasure. I'm looking for the link. Let me go to Pete Dominic here.
Yep. Look at that.
And
I have got him. He's the director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State, one of the most respected climatologists in all the land. As a matter of fact, he's even in high demand with foreign media. All the English-speaking foreign media also want to talk to him. I just saw you on Channel 4.
We treated. All right. We're good.
There we go. Now Michael Mann's over 200 people are able to access his great knowledge as well. So thank you for, you go live on TV. I'm just saying, you're on Channel 4 in the UK, you're on MSNBC, you're on CNN, and now you're on Twitter. It's no pressure for you.
Yeah, no, Twitter, though, is my home, really. So,
right.
Yeah.
It's comfortable, more comfortable then. Well,
yeah.
First of all, let's just talk about, just give me your take on the kind of grossness that we all reach out to you during horrific, awful heat waves, droughts, wildfires, and hurricanes. What's it feel like to know that that's when you're going to get the call?
Well, yeah, I mean, in some sense, it's bad news. I often, when I do interviews, I'll say, I wish I could say it's good to be with you this afternoon, but it doesn't feel that way. But, I suppose it's nothing in comparison with, experts on gun violence, for example. You just imagine what it's like. Every time you're called upon, it's because there's been another tragic shooting.
Right.
And so I suppose this is this is different. I mean, and yet in a larger sense, climate change is really the defining crisis of our time. Right. And we're seeing it play out in real time right now. It's here in the US, in Europe, this record heat, the wildfires. It's like a broken record.
But the problem is, I mean, I've always tried to do and talk to you and talk to other experts, no matter what the news cycle is, but it's kind of a problem that we only talk about it when when there's extremes. And it's usually these kind of heat issues and obviously the wildfires. But in the Guardian, Damian Carrington, the environmental editor, writes, you shared this on Twitter for your Twitter followers, by the way. Great article. Climate scientists express shock at the UK's smashed temperature record with the heat soaring above 40 C. That's Celsius, right? What's that mean?
Exactly. 40 C is 100
first time ever
104 degrees Fahrenheit.
The first time ever on Tuesday. Researchers are also increasingly concerned that extreme heat waves in Europe are occurring more rapidly than models had suggested, indicating the climate crisis on the European continent may be even worse than feared. So they're feeling the effects. And where are the predictions and the actual reality right now?
Yeah, I mean, so the model predictions have been very accurate when it comes to how much the planet is warming up on average. So it's important to keep that in mind. The models have been very reliable in that sense. Where, they have been less accurate is in predicting some of the impacts of that warming. And that's true when it comes to the melting of the ice sheets, the collapse of ice sheets, which is contributing to sea level rise faster than the models predicted it would. And it's true with these extreme weather events, these heat waves and wildfires and floods and superstorms. And that's where the rubber hits the road, right? That's where we really feel the impacts of climate change is in these extreme events. I was thinking a little bit actually about something you were saying, that when these happen, all of a sudden, journalists reach out to climate scientists like myself, and we try to provide that context. But it's interesting because I sort of drew that parallel with gun violence and climate change. And we see sort of the conservative noise machine in both cases, that mantra, oh, this is the wrong time to talk about this problem, whether it's gun violence or a climate change driven disaster, because they recognize that there's a teaching moment there. They recognize there's an opportunity for scientists to connect the dots with the public.
Now they're masters. You got to hand it to them. They're masters at manipulating the message and giving people a grievance. But in this case, it's like, this is the wrong time. Well, there's never a wrong time to talk about climate change. It's happening. It's happening right now. And we're seeing it. You mentioned the rubber hits the road, and that made me think of infrastructure. And, right now in Europe, where their rail is a lot more popular, that you're going to have rails buckling. So just a bit about what you expect to see and how we're supposed to adapt in terms of our infrastructure. And at what point do we just have to shut down a certain part of the day during a certain part of the year, or adapt differently in terms of the way we build and the way that we live to be able to go get through these very, very extremes?
Yeah, it's a great point, Pete, because, we often talk about, again, the impacts of climate change, sea level rise, melting ice. But it's these sorts of events, these extreme events that play out in real time. And as you know, they disrupt our transportation systems. They disrupt our supply chains. And so many of the larger problems we're dealing with right now, even in a sense, inflation right now, is being driven by supply chain interruptions that at least in part are actually now climate change driven. Climate change, these extreme weather events, these disruptive extreme weather events are sort of filtering into every aspect of our life, sometimes in ways that we might not realize and think about, but the impact and the damage is still there.
You were talking to a British broadcast journalist yesterday, I think, and you mentioned the name Joe Manchin. And it's weird, and even if you didn't, that foreign media would be familiar with a person's name like that. Last week was the news that it seemed that Joe Manchin put the dagger in the heart of any significant climate legislation. And, he wants to keep it going. There's the talks, apparently, they're barely on life support at this point. Time is running out for the Senate, much less,
It's Lucy in the football. He has no intention whatsoever of ever supporting meaningful climate action. We just have to come to terms with that.
Right. And that's where, we've got so much of our hope tied up in that. What do you want to say about kind of the consequences of this one man in this broken political institution, which is the U.S. Senate?
Yeah, I mean, it's broken in the sense that one person like that, one obstinate Democrat in name only, can basically impede the entire agenda of his
he's
party.
Actually coal-powered himself.
What's that?
He's actually coal-powered himself. I wasn't sure if you knew that. He runs on, literally.
I don't know where you insert the coal to, it's through the mouth. Okay, all right. So, that does seem to be true. In coal, has his profits from his investments in the coal industry and his ties to the coal industry are what allow him to drive a Maserati and live on a yacht. He doesn't live on a mansion. Joe Manchin doesn't live in a mansion because he lives on a yacht instead. It's remarkable, and it goes further than, what's wrong with the system goes further than that. It's gerrymandering, of course. It's the filibuster. And so you ask, what's the solution? The solution is actually pretty simple, Pete. As dire and as bad as it all seems, the solution is really simple. Recognize that Joe Manchin isn't going to vote with Democrats on these key issues. Recognize that Kristen Sinema isn't, and recognize that means we need massive turnout in these midterm elections so that we have a real Democratic majority in Congress that can pass this stuff.
And I guess, because you've worked and traveled and lived, I think last year you were in Australia, right? Was it last year?
2 years ago. It's all a blur, isn't it? The whole pandemic. Yeah.
You have a good understanding, certainly how politics works in general, certainly in the U.S. You've written about it, obviously, how media works, but it's different in these other countries. And so my question is, isn't it just the Republican Party? There are individuals who are climate deniers and paid off and so on in British Parliament and Australian Parliament and elsewhere. Of course, there are individuals. But in terms of political parties, it is this one political party with their friend Joe Manchin. The Republican Party of the United States seems to be holding hostage really important climate policy for the rest of the world that could be signed on at one of the climate treaties. Is that fair to say based on what you've seen?
That is exactly right, my friend. I mean, that's where we are right now, right? The United States has to lead on this issue. We're the largest polluter in history. If we don't lead, how can we expect China and India and other developing countries to come to the table and do their part? And so we have to be in a leadership role. Joe Biden is doing what he can. And even today, he's, giving this speech outlining what he's going to try to do in the face of intransigence by our conservative courts and by, a Congress that's stuck, as we've been talking about. If the United States doesn't lead here, then there's really no opportunity for meaningful global engagement in addressing the climate crisis. And we're so close, right? It's one coal state senator right now is what's effectively blocking climate progress for the world.
In terms of where the market solutions lie, I mean, if California has these strong regulations and if the market now coincided when people can finally buy an electric pickup truck, although a lot of these new vehicles are really not that affordable for most Americans and they need to be somehow more affordable. But is the market going to be able to solve this, including that certain states in this country are going to pass regulations that are going to make sense and kind of everybody but the polluters win?
Yeah, I mean, I am a believer that we can make substantial progress within the framework of market economics. We don't have to do away with capitalism to make progress in dealing with climate change. Some people will argue we do. Will argue that environmental sustainability is fundamentally incompatible with a resource-driven global market economy. I think we've got to make progress within the framework of the system that exists right now because we don't have time to wait for the change in that system that ultimately may be necessary. Ultimately, we may have to move to something far more sustainable. But in the meantime, we've got to make progress using the lever arms we have.
I've always thought it is capitalism's fault, it's human behavior's fault, but I agree with you in a pragmatic reality situation. This is the economic system that we have, and we have to hope that we can build and make things that will be cleaner, that people will want. Certainly I have, and in my life, it's made everything better. But all right, well, we will see what happens next, and it's always great to check in with you. What are you most concerned about in the coming days with these heat waves in Europe?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm just concerned that people aren't prepared to cope with it. Brits are not prepared to cope with Phoenix, Arizona, like midsummer heat. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the air conditioning. A good friend of mine said he's up in, he's in the UK. They don't have air conditioning. They've been dealing with, triple digit temperatures Fahrenheit. So I worry that there's going to be substantial loss of life. There were 30,000 people who died in the 2003 European heat wave. And I fear that we may continue to see those fatalities pile up with this latest heat wave.
Dr. Michael Mann, thank you for joining me. If people want to listen to this or share it on Twitter. Hey, Twitter. You can share it right here, and you can hear it on tomorrow's Stand Up with Pete Dominick, where I get to interview super smart, awesome people like Michael every day. I love you. I appreciate you, and I very much.
Thank you, my friend. And follow Pete Dominick on Twitter. It's the best handle in my feed. So yeah.
You're the best, buddy. Thank you very much for the plugs back. And I am now going to end our broadcast. Bye, everybody.
So long. Thanks, Pete.
Well, there you have it. Dr. Michael Mann of Penn State, soon University of Pennsylvania, and he has been appearing on domestic and international television media outlets all week because of this horrific heat wave that many of us are living through, experiencing right now. I hope that you are finding ways to cope and keep cool. You probably don't get as much work done, right? Do you get as much work done when the weather is like this? I hate the AC, so I try not to use it. Last night, I like to sleep with a fan on me. I'm one of those sociopaths. Yeah, a fan blowing straight on me. Bring it to me. But last night, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was like, you know what? I need to turn on the AC. We have window units, and so I turned on the AC, and then I closed the door. And when I woke up a few hours later, I opened the door, and Indy was right there by the door. Like, I forgot to let her in to enjoy the cold room with me. I felt terrible. Anyway, I felt terrible for using the AC as well. Dr. Michael Mann, hope you appreciated that. Bill Boyle is a resident of Washington, D.C. He's a historian. He's a business owner. He runs parking garages, apparently. A lot of people think that he works in government or that he's somehow a spy. None of those things are true, as far as I can tell. But he talks to everybody down there. I think he goes to bars or something and sits and talks. We should ask him what he does, if he ever just walks in and sits at a bar and meets and talks to people. But he's just a really social, likable guy, and everybody likes him. Very, very smart, fun to talk to and hang out with, as always. And today was no exception. We talked for almost an hour. It's a really fascinating conversation where we covered the latest, his thoughts at least, on the Secret Service texts scandal, the texts that disappeared. We talked a lot about Ukraine, and we talked about some domestic politics and policy as well. I think you're going to love it. He's always great. If you like it, go tell him on Twitter at BillBNDC. He's great on Twitter as well. You should follow him there, and let's do it.
Peter, how are you?
William Boyle.
How are you, sir?
It's Billy Boyle.
Top of the morning to you.
I know who did it. It was that Billy Boyle.
I'm sure that was said by somebody at some point in my life. I think it's a guarantee.
I have a billion questions for you, and I'm recording.
Excellent. I am as well. Shoot. Fire.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Good. So I didn't tell you that I wanted to talk about this one, but then I went and looked at your Twitter feed, and it made me so much more interested in the new scandal around the Secret Service texts. Bill, Is there any way that there's no there with this, that this is just a routine cleansing of the phones? They were upgrading the phones. It is an accident. Is there any way that there's any truth to that?
No, that's complete bullshit. It's the most ridiculous and preposterous thing in the world.
Oh.
The events of January 5th and 6th were the most important and dangerous and terrible events of the Secret Service's modern history. And I'm supposed to believe, you're supposed to believe, America's supposed to believe that 24 people, police officers, these are officers of the law who are sworn in, who understand evidence, were all told by email twice and verbally, apparently, keep your text for that day. Super important. It's potentially evidence in the later investigation. And every single one of those guys ignored those reminders. They're sworn law officers who understand investigation, and they understand evidence, and they understand the importance of evidence, and they went and just got rid of it. And of course, they got rid of the evidence that might pertain to them personally. There is absolutely no way that there was not some sort of thing that happened there, whether it was everybody kind of drinking coffee and saying, you're not going to save your fucking texts, are you? Because I'm on there too. Or whether there was an actual organized attempt to do it. It's 24 people. The odds of all 24 missing the same 2 memos and the other, compelling reasons to do it is just not, it's just not possible. It's not.
Why not? I mean, people ignore emails all the time.
Yeah. But Pete, okay. So somebody says to you, Pete, hey, you're the biggest show that you've ever recorded. You've got it on this device. We're going to replace that device. Make sure to save that. Do you just drop ignore it?
No, I don't feel like it's a good analogy because I have an interest in keeping that show. The Secret Service guys don't have an interest. I guess that defeats my argument because I was saying that they ignored it. But I mean, they clearly deleted people deleted texts.
Yes, they did. And they did it because, and for a couple of different reasons, by the way, right?
Are you even allowed to do that on your government phone or email?
No, you're not supposed to. And here's what's really interesting. Most government agencies that I am passingly aware of, there's an organized process where, they don't go to you and say at the State Department and say, hey, Pete, just remember to keep your stuff. There's like this whole long process where, things get recorded and kept and they have IT people that do it, et cetera. I think the fact that the Secret Service just kind of left it up to the agents to record that is not accidental either for long running bureaucratic reasons. This is the agency that has had people get busted for prostitution in Colombia and Mexico. They've had guys get busted for domestic abuse, drunkenness, etc. This agency has been stumbling around in a pretty bad way for 15 years. I guarantee you that the reason that no one will want to admit to that this was left up to the individuals is that there's a long running avoidance of keeping this stuff because they're afraid of what will happen if people read it.
What do you do? I mean,
there's a mystique about the Secret Service, and I've engaged with them many times. And both uniformed and, the guys who wear suits, there's a mystique they walk around carrying with themselves that is fairly ridiculous, particularly the non-uniformed ones. And that being said, the uniformed ones, all during Trump's administration, you would go to Lafayette Park, I'd ride my kid down there on his bike, and these guys most of them were fairly openly pro-Trump. These are the uniformed guys. After Trump lost, my kid and I were noticing that the uniformed guys weren't shaving that were out in Lafayette Park, which is obviously not the image that agency normally projects.
Well, what about this?
Sorry, go ahead.
I saw that you also shared Michael Beschloss, who's a historian. He tweeted, now, once again, why did Trump take Ornato from Secret Service and make him the White House Deputy Chief of Staff in charge of, among other things, continuity of the U.S. government in case of grave crisis? Now, Bill, I don't like these types of tweets. I mean, I'm okay with this kind of conversation off the air, but anybody can ask a good question and then we can all run to the conclusions. And I think Rachel Maddow has done that, connecting the dot stuff for years. And, it looks like she's probably right, but it's still a lot of questions being asked. I feel uncomfortable.
She sucks, though. And here's why she sucks. Rachel Maddow the other night pulled out that legal memo from Garland claiming that it supported what Barr had said in the past and it was this huge deal. That was all bullshit. All Garland did, in effect, was restate what had been Department of Justice agency policy for a long time. People like David Simon and who knows a lot about how the justice system works, and a lot of other people.
David Simon tweeted, I also saw this at your Twitter feed. This is, he quoted the Maddow show with their reporting on this segment that they made. I didn't see it, but apparently misses the mark in terms of the framing of what she's saying happened. Simon says about Madhouse reporting, having reported on federal political investigations all the way back to the Reagan era under GOP and Dem admins both, I can say this isn't doubling down on Bill Barr and his policy. This has been a standard Department of Justice boilerplate ethos and professional policy for at least 4 decades. And I'll take David Simon's word over most.
Yes. And here's the point, though. This is why we're not that's my point about how we're not like Rachel Maddow. Rachel Maddow took something completely out of context and got a bunch of clicks and a bunch of viewers.
But it's a different kind of Rachel Maddow. Your point, yes. But I'm talking about just this idea that Beschloss or anybody else asked the question, because the sexiest question that any podcast like myself wants to ask, someone like you or anybody that might know, and they can speculate, is that somehow the Secret Service was in on something in or around January 6th or Mike Pence or whatever. And that's too sexy. It's too sexy. It's too tempting.
Well, but we do have a lot of evidence. I have both anecdotal, as I just told you, of my interactions with them. We also have, and by the way, this is not like, I'm not an outlier in this. You have all these things of Pence refusing to get into his vehicle. You have Pence's chief of staff saying that there was a possibility, literally warning Pence and other people in the White House that there were issues with the Secret Service and Mike Pence, that he might be in danger in some way. You have Mike Pence, as again I said, refusing to get in that car is a huge deal, right? Literally saying, I don't trust you guys.
Yep.
You have, and again, the reality that 24 people, police officer or officers of a police agency, all went out of their way to get rid of evidence. That's not this. We're not taking a memo and overreading.
But you don't know it's evidence. That's what I'm saying.
No, it 100% is evidence, even if it's completely innocuous.
Even if it's about their fantasy football drafts?
Totally evidence. Because by the way, think about it. If you're Trump, that would be great if these guys have nothing bad to say and everything is kosher. If they're saying, he doesn't want to go to the Capitol, he doesn't want to do anything crazy, he doesn't want to overthrow the government, that would be awesome for Trump if they had all the texts, right? And if the agents themselves were above board and hadn't done anything weird or wrong, then they also would totally.
The most likely tech,
whether it's evidence of something bad happening or good happening, it's evidence. They are police officers. They know
the evidence. The likely. Okay, I'll take the bait. The likelihood of a conversation being between Secret Service agents being POTUS or whatever they call him, Whopper, Burger King, Big Mac. Big Mac just tried to choke out Bruce, who's driving the beast, like gossiping about the idea that the president himself would somehow put Secret Service in danger or physically attack them or even bark at them and treat them harshly. These guys are humans. They talk about the president. I mean, that's the one I think is I want to know what that conversation was in text or wherever they had it.
Right. And let's also add to this that there is, when Hutchinson gave her testimony, right, she related a story, which the Secret Service leaked that was going to be debunked by sworn in testimony by Ornato and other Secret Service guys. Then, of course, they never showed up. They never did that sworn testimony. Then you had DC police who were in the president's detail. They do escort, saying, yeah, we saw her. We saw what she described. Right. And then you have if you look at, I think it's Cherry Jacobus's book, where she literally found Twitter feeds, social media of people in Trump's detail, Secret Service agents in Trump's detail, being profoundly anti-Biden and pro-Trump. That's what they put in social media, public social media. So we're not stretching anything. We're not going anywhere beyond what the evidence we have is to be able to pretty clearly see these texts must have been absolute dynamite.
You think?
And must have been absolutely terrible. And remember, there's a lot of different things, again, that go on here. You might have texts of some of these agents saying, what the fuck are you assholes doing? Right? You could have texts from guys saying, let's help him get to the Capitol building. We could have other ones. you could have the Secret Service itself embroiled in the same crisis that everyone else was at that moment, and Secret Service agents would feel just as compelled to hide that too, right? So it's not. I'm not saying it's going to be Colonel Mustard with the candlestick killing democracy in these texts, but obviously these texts are dynamite. And by the way, wouldn't shock me in the slightest if everyone ignored the order to put them into the designated storage, but that if a couple of these guys did save them just for this moment. Because if I'm one of the guys who's not a Trump sympathizer and I'm being put under a lot of pressure to not save these texts in the way they're supposed to, I might save them later, save them in a different place as insurance.
At least one of them. It's not like there are law enforcement. And, you mentioned
no way all 24 guys love Trump. And there's no way that some of them were not smart enough to go, there's no fucking way this never comes back on us. And the head of the Secret Service, by the way, just quit suddenly, 2 weeks ago? So
he was in charge then?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Shit. The plot thickens.
So you have all of the elements. This is not some sort of rando.
The big thing about a conspiracy is, an actual, I think, is it lowercase c conspiracies? If you have 24 people, somebody.
Yes.
You can't keep that secret. It's impossible. It's any more than 2 people, 3 people. Like, it's impossible. Each person exponentially creates possibility for the truth to come out, and it always does. I would feel. I think, especially.
Correct. I mean, what's the old line that if 3 people have a secret, you can keep it if 2 of them are dead?
Yeah, I never heard that. I don't think.
I think that's exactly what's happening here.
All right. Also, wanted to talk with you about the just a little bit of domestic politics and what's happening right now in the country. Everybody's talking about inflation and gas prices because that's what people who aren't that politically savvy are thinking about and will be thinking about, and who knows where things are going to be come November. But what are you watching and paying attention to in terms of the upcoming midterm elections, and including that storyline that Republicans might fuck it up and give away seats that would have been sure wins if they ran, quote, normal assholes, as opposed to people like Herschel Walker, who's just bizarre. Right. Just, I don't know what other word to describe him and what he's saying. What are your thoughts on the midterm elections, that Senate storyline, or anything else?
I think that the Democrats are slightly favored to keep the Senate, in large part because Senate seats are statewide, which means they're much less affected by gerrymandering. And they're really not affected by gerrymandering at all, frankly. And you have such a bad crop of GOP candidates. Walker is just getting all the attention, but almost all of them are pretty fucking bad on the open seats. And I just think, and there's some challenging Democrats in part of some of these states where they're just awful. And so I think that Republicans have managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory in the Senate. And even if, say, the Republicans get 51 seats, Mitch McConnell's going to have a hell of a time keeping all those people together on big votes. So I think the Senate is at minimum neutered, if not kept in the Democratic side. I think in the House, I would say 75% chance Republicans take it. But again, something to look at is that gasoline prices are dropping precipitously at this point. And winter will not have come yet by the November elections. So whatever's going to happen with Russian gas in Europe is unlikely to have huge effects in, early November. I also think that, commodity prices in general are collapsing. If I'm sure, followed Bruce Ritholtz, and, he is constantly showing that, prices are dropping and inflation has probably almost certainly peaked. So if inflation comes down, I think.
You said Bruce, do you mean Barry Ritholtz?
Barry Ritholtz. I'm sorry. God.
Sorry. Confusing as hell for everybody.
He never responds to my text anyway, so fuck him.
He's a bastard. Go ahead.
Exactly. So I think with inflation coming down, I think especially gas prices are really headed down. And with Roe versus Wade helping Democrats to turn out for sure. I think that you're going to see probably a closer House result than people expect. The Republicans, too, now that the primaries are over, are going to come out of the phase where they're mostly running against each other. And you're going to start to see things like this guy Cox in Maryland, who is the GOP nominee who was there on January 6th, is an absolute lunatic. And the Democrats were very smart to help that guy win the primary.
Oh, you like that strategy where the Democrats help support the craziest Republican because you like that. Some people have been critical of it, I guess. I don't know who.
Yeah, like Damon Linker and people like that are critical of it. And Damon Linker and people like him have never won a fucking election in their life. Right. And it killed. I mean, I watch this stuff and I know people who work in politics and I know journalists and they're never the same people. Right. Like,
well, sometimes. And that's what makes the best ones, I think. But yeah,
exactly. The really good ones are like guys like Gergen or Jeff Greenfield, guys who actually worked in politics. And you notice they tend to be very, nuanced in their reaction to things like this. Democrats got this guy in Maryland to run for governor Larry Hogan, the Republican governor, just at the minute this guy won the primary, said, I'll never vote for that fucking guy ever in my life.
So Larry Hogan is the Republican governor. He term limited out.
Yes. And he very vociferously, when Cox won yesterday, said there's no fucking chance in hell I'd ever vote for that guy. That is great for Democrats in all these down ballot races all through the state. And it's not for Democrats' job to save the GOP from themselves.
But just to be clear, Democrats helped support Cox, the guy who won the nomination, so that they would have a better shot at winning the general. That's right. And it draws the line very clearly. And what that means is they make ads, I think. Yes. And by the way, there's not a lot of evidence that this works very often. I mean, it worked for Claire McCaskill in Missouri once. It's not something that happens all the time or works very well. Typically the person who wins when the Dems help them out or the Republicans help out a Dem typically was somebody who was probably always going to win and was always going to be an anvil on that. I don't understand. Yeah. I get confused as to the strategy here. So if I make a negative ad, if I'm a Democrat and I make a negative ad about my opponent, why is that any different than a Democrat making a negative or whatever? What are they making? Positive ads and touting his crazy to get? A little bit. Yeah. They typically do ads that are somewhere in the middle. I got to see one of these ads that they're talking about. They sound fascinating. Yeah, they're not all that. This is not like, weird science that they're doing. It's basically trying to hurt the guy who could help them more or could help the opposition more. Well, we were talking about the midterms and help them. Let's get back to the question of you mentioned the House. Well, you didn't really weigh in on the House. You said it's 75%, I think is what you said. Yeah, which is, I think it's a higher chance than most people do. And again, I think it's because Democrats are being smart about who they're helping win on the GOP side. The GOP is nominating through their totally insane primary voters some really awful candidates. And I'm not sure. I think that people are spending too much time thinking about every past election and saying this one's going to be the same, which they do for obvious reasons. It gives them data, right, to work with. But I could very easily see a situation where Biden's at 39% and he doesn't weigh down the Democrats nearly as much as would normally happen. When a president midterms has got bad numbers, that typically really hurts his own party in the midterms. But if you look at this current moment, for instance, Republicans on generic balloting have lost 15 points with people over 65 in the last 3 months. So there's the data is murkier than people I think realize. The turnout is all that matters, and polling at this point out. But so I'll tell you though something about turnout. I don't think anymore. I've changed my mind about this recently. Turnout is less important than convincing people to vote for you. And I've come to this from doing a lot of reading about this in the last 6 months. And David Shore is a good example of someone who really pushes this. Democrats push turnout, and we're good at it. But we've kind of done it about as well as you can. The kids are not all going to suddenly show up this midterm. They never do, right? And
The marginal voters, they never do. We've already maximized out the folks that are going to vote. And yes, they vote less in midterms and more in generals, but still, what's happening now is less about turnout than the fact that Republicans are convincing people not to vote for them. Right?
I see.
It's the moderate conservative 65-year-old is saying, whoa, my gay nephew can't get married in Ohio? Fuck this. Right? And that's I think what's happening. And we'll see if I'm proved right or not. But I think that the GOP is really eroding themselves in the burbs. And I think that gives Democrats a much better run this time than they should expect one to have one. So,
Bill, I want to ask you about Ukraine and what's happening in that war, but I want to ask you a moral question first. Been thinking about, listener, suggested the idea that the United States and other countries are perpetuating a war between Russia and Ukraine by supporting Ukraine when we all know how these things turn out and how this one is going to turn out, that Russia is going to take whatever it wants and anyone it wants and win. And we are just prolonging the inevitable, thus prolonging the suffering and misery by supporting this proxy war, which is also leading us closer to the brink of World War III or nuclear war. I feel like that is a legitimate thought, concern based on history, that is not necessarily certainly not an irrational idea. What do you think?
Oh, you really want to get me going today, huh? So I just was looking this morning. I posted it. Picture of his father with a red tarp over his dead.
Yeah, I just saw that. I just saw it. Yeah.
Outside of Kharkiv, right. I think the people who make that argument can go fuck themselves, frankly, for historical reasons and many others. Number one, historically, that's exactly the argument that the appeasement party in Britain and the rest of Europe and the United States was making about the Nazis in 1940. And
they were wrong argument. Because the Nazis lost.
They lost because we didn't accept. But
there's so many other issues, right? But there's so many other examples of this throughout history where that wasn't the case, so every example of history though
isn't the same as every other one.
Sure,
this is not a unique but a rare situation in which, in Europe, a hegemonic authoritarian government has decided to upend the order and doesn't care who it kills in the process, and has broken all the accepted norms in doing so. I mean, Russia, by the way, is doing this even when it had many other ways it could have gone about being a country for the last 20 years. Russia could have made the choice to be a consumer economy and have rich citizens and happy citizens. Instead, Russia, like Germany in the 30s, was taken over by autocrats and people who don't believe in democracy and don't really give a shit about their citizens. They attacked Ukraine. They have said they want to attack the Baltic states. They have said they want to take parts of Poland. They've said, and they've tried to launch a coup in Moldova. They tried to launch a coup in Montenegro, which everyone's forgotten about. They did the same in Kosovo. This is an aggressive authoritarian government that believes that if it does not control all of the hinterlands to its west, that its government will be overthrown and these guys will no longer be a great power, and culturally they can't accept that. So we're talking about hey, if we keep this war going, right, then we are perpetuating this. We're not perpetuating shit. We didn't start it. Russia started this in 2008 with Georgia and has escalated steadily ever since. And so the idea that we could kind of go, you know what, let's give them some land and it'll be okay. Today, Lavrov was saying that they need to take all of Ukraine today. Right? So the argument for appeasement is, do we let this super shitty, terrible dictatorship that treats its own people like shit and non-Russians even worse have its way with Europe? Is that what we want?
No, I think
there are no wars.
I don't know what the argument is because it's not mine, and I don't know history, but I think the issue is that we are perpetuating the war by giving them, half measures, and eventually it's going to end we're going to stop giving them money, and Russia's not going to stop. They're going to keep going, and it's definitely going to be won by Russia. And the reason why we are doing this is because they're not a NATO country. If it were a NATO country, then of course we'd be all in, and we'd be giving them fighter jets and everything else they possibly need. And so I guess that argument has always been made by people who think that Russia would stop after Ukraine.
Right. And it's also made by people, and it's weird. I mean, some people who I think know Russia quite well, kind of, there's this attitude that Russia sort of has an endless bucket to draw from of men, of arms, of material and everything. And that's just not true. Russia is not, I think we kind of talked about this last time. And I said, Russia's not fucking magic. They're not magic. They can't just suddenly, out of their deep Slavic soul, pull 20 divisions of men. They are running out of men. They are in deep trouble in this war already. And if you want me to get real technical about it, we can. But they're very close probably to losing everything west of the Dnieper River. That's that big city, Kherson, and everything on that side of that river. Which is
they're close to losing land they already took?
Yes. Yeah, they were on their way to Odessa. They managed to get across the Dnieper, which was a big achievement, probably through suborning the Ukrainian army and secret services that were in Kherson. Well, now the Ukrainians are well on their way back. They're hitting the bridge. There's two bridges over the Dnieper River, one at Kherson and one 60 miles north. And then you got to go like 60 or 70 miles farther north from that to find another bridge. Ukraine is destroying those bridges as we speak, or damaging them. And when that happens, Russia's not going to be able to supply that side of the river very well, and they're going to get their asses kicked back over. So it's the idea that Russia has all these resources it can just draw on is bullshit. They don't. A, and then B, another idea is that Russia, is sort of in a really strong spot, strategically as far as the military goes, isn't true either. They're about to lose the one major Ukrainian city they took. They're about to lose. On top of that, I'll give you a great example of, I read this thing from Dylan Radigan that made me want to, if I could reach across the internet and punch somebody in the face, I would have.
I just heard somebody who knows him well. I used to really like him, but the former CNBC guy?
Correct. And he was talking about how sanctions don't work and sanctions are terrible and we should stop doing sanctions on Russia. And here's just one single example of why that is such a completely fucking stupid thing. And his point was, it's not helping in any way. Russia makes artillery barrels, the thing the shell shoots out of from a piece of artillery, out of steel. Well, in 2014, the particular high-grade steel that Russia was using for those barrels, we sanctioned in 2014 after their last attack on Ukraine. They've been making the barrels from a less appropriate steel ever since. Well, when you are shooting artillery out of a barrel, the barrel degrades. And if the steel isn't good steel, it degrades even faster. And when it degrades to a certain point, you can't hit the side of a barn with that cannon. Well, Russia right now is rapidly running out of artillery barrels and having to make them with less and less steel just in general, because their economy is collapsing and they can't get steel from overseas. And they're having to make it, the ones they do make are made with steel that's even worse than they had 6 months ago. So it's literally a situation where the one thing the Russians are really good at is artillery. By our sanctions, we are slowly squeezing down their ability to shoot it accurately or even to make enough cannons to shoot it. So it's just one little microcosm thing, and I can get into detail for hours about various other things. But the bottom line is that, we are actually squeezing the Russians like an orange in military and economic terms. The Russians are not winning. And there's also no, the idea that we're suddenly just going to walk away from this next year. That's not necessarily true at all. I don't think that, there's the one thing that you see in Congress is 18 Republicans were the only ones to vote against Sweden and Finland being in NATO. There's not some big groundswell in Congress that I can see among Republicans either to stop helping the Ukrainians in this war.
What did you make of that? What was behind those no votes against joining NATO? Those countries, the Republicans, several Republicans joined.
I don't think that Boebert even knows where Finland is. I mean, I think it's just performative on one level, and on another level, it's that they are authoritarians and they are, they have an affinity for Putin, just like Trump did.
Let me ask you this. I kind of already asked this to some extent, but a listener said, I'd love for you to bring Bill B back on. I'd really like to hear him talk about Ukraine again. He made a very persuasive case a few months ago the Russians were going to lose the war in Ukraine. I'd like to get an update on his analysis, given what's going on. I think he's a very clear thinker and analyst. The current situation could use that. And if he's changed his mind, that would be an interesting thing to hear.
Right. So as you just heard, I have very much not changed my mind on that front. Russia right now is literally going to their prisons to find men to fight. They are putting together what they're calling volunteer, Cossack battalions. The people in those battalions are like 16-year-olds and 65-year-olds. They're desperately struggling to get enough men just to keep the line manned. That's not the sign of a country that's winning a war, right? On top of that, they are running out of things like artillery barrels, which is the one arm where they have had some dominance. They moved most of their fleet out of Sebastopol in the Black Sea over to a place called Novorossiysk, I want to say, which is their base that's all the way on the east end of the Black Sea. And that last point is interesting because we've been talking about the Russians. The Russians now are moving that fleet out because of something that's happening with the Ukrainians. And what's happening with the Ukrainians is they're getting artillery systems that don't have the mass of what the Russians have, but are far more precise and thus are far more powerful. Because if I can hit, a fly at 30 kilometers, I don't need 50 shells to do it. And what the Ukrainians have been doing steadily is hitting every large Russian ammunition dump within 30 kilometers of the front line. And they can do this because these systems they have, they're called HIMARS, which basically means a long-range missile system that's very accurate. They can do this because they have a longer range than the Russian artillery. So they are destroying millions and millions of artillery shells and bullets and supplies and everything else with impunity. Armies operate on their stomachs. That's the old saw, right? The Russian army is getting punched in the stomach every day by the Ukrainians. So they're having issues with supply. They're having issues with manpower. They don't really have a particularly great strategy. I honestly don't really know what their strategy is, because if it's just to declare we're going to, we get to the border of Donetsk, right? And they could gain some more ground in the Donetsk. So say they get, another 30 kilometers into Ukraine. If they just declare suddenly, hey, we won, we're just keeping this and that's it. Well, that's great, but Ukraine's not going to stop, right? Ukraine has Bucha. They found in a part of Ukraine that they recaptured, they found a children's school where the Russians had turned the basement into a torture chamber. They've got that 13-year-old boy and his poor father sitting there holding his hand under a tarp and on the street in front of their building. The Ukrainians are never going to forget, and they're never going to stop. And there's no reason they should, because even if they got 1/10 of the support they're getting now, as time goes on, they are getting stronger as the Russians are getting weaker.
You're talking about a potential.
It's Poland and the U.S. to help them, and that's it.
That's all they need is Poland and the U.S.?
Sure, because they're getting $40 billion worth of American aid. That's already...
Yeah, but so that brings me to my final question in terms of just looking ahead. I don't know if people were wrong. I think I was wrong, but it doesn't matter because I don't know shit about the fact that Russia would go out of business because India is buying all of their oil and they're selling just as much oil. They're just selling it to a new partner, India, and I think China as well. They're both buying the oil, so they're fine.
No, they're not.
Okay, so let me finish the point, and then you can crush both of them, which is the other point is if Trump wins, or any Republican, frankly, the irony here, too, in terms of foreign policy, trading positions, that they're going to continue sending this kind of money, American taxpayer money, to Ukraine. More importantly, forget about why are we sending money? They love Putin. Trump loves Putin. He's going to do whatever he says. So those two questions, I thought they were going to go out of business. And what if Trump gets elected? He loves Putin in Russia.
So two things. If Trump gets elected in 2024, that's a disaster of epic proportions for everybody, not just Ukraine, the whole world. But that's 2024. It is now 2022. I will be very surprised if the Russians can keep their shit together until then.
Okay.
In terms of this war.
So that's where you would then have to admit you were wrong, I suppose. If in 2 years you're giving yourself a lot of time. If in 2 years
I'm literally just saying that I think it'll suck. I'll admit I'm wrong, and I'll be deeply depressed if we're still there.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But the issue is that yes, Russia's selling gasoline to India, somewhat to China. But the issue for the Russians is they get all this money, which they can't use anywhere really because of sanctions. Right. And their industry, for instance, Russia has stopped making tanks 3 months ago. They can't make any tanks. They're going to make a grand total of 3,000 cars this year. The year before the war, they made 240,000 cars in Russia. Their economy, the ruble looks good, right? Which is a thing people look at and go, oh, wow, look at how well they're doing. That's actually bullshit. They're supporting the price of the ruble through the use of the cash they're getting from oil sales. But that doesn't mean that everything's good in your economy anymore.
No, it doesn't. But it does mean that their currency is stable, which a lot of people predicted it was.
Right. But here's the issue, right? The more time and money they spend keeping their currency stable and high now, the greater the inflation and the unwinding of the economy is later. And that, by the way, is a statement that was made by the Russian finance minister. So that's not even like a Western assessment. That's the Russian
before she resigned.
She tried to resign. Putin threatened to kill her, and she's back on the job.
Oh, is that right?
That is right. When she tried to resign, that's when she said that. And then she went into a meeting with Putin. And she came out and said, I guess I'm not quitting.
Oh, wow.
And she is very, very smart. And one of the few, I think I know people who have met her, and I hear her spoken of very highly.
You think
she was like a bureaucrat who was not some Silovic ex-KGB asshole.
So I mean, okay. Well, let me move on from this. And one final question about, the latest on the January 6th committee investigation. We talked about the Secret Service text messages, obviously, that prolongs the investigation. But as of now, you and I are talking on Wednesday. And tomorrow night, prime time, there's a hearing, although the chairman has COVID. I don't know what that means.
He will not be there, I believe. So it'll be Liz Cheney running it.
Well, good, because she's a better communicator. So sorry, I'm so heartless, but I just think he's not as good. But anyway, what do you think? Where do you think we're at with this? What is the relevant question? Obviously, it needs to continue. It needs to be done. Do you think we still have a lot more to learn publicly?
Yes, I think we have a lot more to learn. I think what the committee has done is smart in that they did not get super weedy about any of it.
Mm-hmm.
They just put together a really compelling media case that kind of puts a frame around everything we already knew.
Right.
And I think that is great because I think it makes it hard for Garland and the Justice Department to say, this is maybe something we can't touch.
Right.
I think that's the point of it. I think the point of it is to just make it makes the politics much easier for Garland. Right. And anyone who says, well, him doing this is not political, it's bullshit. Every DOJ investigation and conviction of a politician is political. And the DOJ needs to maintain some level of broad acceptance in the public that it has probity and fairness. Right. Well, if Garland 4 months ago had suddenly indicted Trump, everyone on the right, even in the center right, would have said, oh, what the fuck? Now, a lot of people in the middle are saying, okay, it's pretty clear these guys did this. So they have done the smart thing, which is create a political space for Trump to be indicted. I don't know whether he will be. I do suspect a lot of people will be. And I think that's what they're going to continue to do Thursday. Is this the last one, by the way?
I think they're keeping it open. They want to put a book out. I think that's important to them. They want to have a conclusion to the investigation, but it would seem that there is never going to be a conclusion to this story. And then, and that's not untrue of other investigations in this country or others where new details obviously come out and things get added, obviously, in any investigation. But I think they want to, politically, obviously, I think it's fair to say they want it done by the midterm elections, but they keep, it seems like good people or whatever people keep coming forward, but like, I have something to say.
Yeah. And what they've done also, by the way, is only kind of shown us some ankle, right? I know they've talked to hundreds of people, and all of that's going to be turned over to the DOJ. And by the way, this gets back, by the way, at how full of shit Rachel Maddow is. There's no way that any investigation that could possibly indict Trump would ever be finished by November 5th. There's no way. So when Garland says, look, we have to be careful about, whether we affect the political process, A, Trump's not running in the midterms. B, it's incredibly unlikely that he would be indicted by DOJ before the end of this year.
So you're saying that Madhouse segment was the Madhouse Mountain on the Molehill segment?
Yeah, and she does this all the time. That's why I never watch her, because the minute you scratch the surface of what she's saying, it's like Trump's taxes turned out to be complete bullshit. And the reality is that she got brought into TV by guess who? You know who discovered her?
Was it not Olbermann?
Carlson.
What?
Tucker Carlson discovered her.
Oh, well, that discovered her. I mean, that's too much. He
brought her.
I think he helped her at one point.
Enormously helped her get into television.
A lot of people did. A lot of people helped her and continue to.
Right, but I think that is a bit telling, because I think in some ways she is not as noxious and clearly not a racist and all that stuff. But it's that same style of doing things where you sort of do a lot of insinuation and you overread things to get clicks and to get eyeballs. And so I think people need to. Well,
there is a lot of I'm just asking questions, watch this space that makes me uncomfortable. But getting back.
And she doesn't deliver.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say too often. But for, to have a certain amount of credibility, maybe that's why she got out, or at least more out.
Right.
But to do a different kind of work that makes more sense even than trying to get ratings on day-to-day TV, the kind that she needs. And never got really very much, except for during the Russia investigation. Probably changed the programming, and look at me talking. So getting back to the investigation and the timeline here, I mean, I think we have this hearing tomorrow night. And by the way, what does Pat Cipollone look like that he didn't come testify until a 26-year-old woman did?
Oh, I think it's fascinating. And I think, by the way, that that doesn't surprise.
Who has everything to lose? Maybe you could argue gain, but certainly your personal danger.
I think there's a misapprehension that these principled guys have balls. I don't think a lot of them do. I think they're not
principled guys.
Well, I think Cipollone is in some ways. I mean, let me put it this way: Cipollone definitely would have thrown himself in front of the train if Trump had gone to the point of hiring Clark and firing Rubin. He would have. All those guys would have resigned.
Yeah, but I feel I guess I'm still stuck on every single one of them should have walked out of the White House and said, I just saw, this is a thing I just saw the president say or do. I'm out of here. And get me out. Or as Lindsey Graham said after January 6th, count me out. Count me out. Oh, wait, I'm back in.
That son of a bitch. But the thing about somebody like Hutchinson, right, is that she is not walking out of the White House into a big law firm job that she might lose if she talks. Right? You walk out of the Trump White House and you're 26 and you are Mark Meadows' chief of staff. Even with, like, in the respectable world in Washington, you just fucked yourself. You're done. Because no one wants to touch those people. You don't have to
work in the respectable world of Washington. She can go work at Big Pharma. She can go work anywhere she wants as a spokesperson.
Not really, because you can't.
She's all set. She is all set the rest of her life, mark my words.
She is now. When this settles down, she'll be fine. But if you're somebody who was seen as a good soldier for Trump in the White House after January 6th, what corporation's going to want you in their lobbying shop? Nobody. You're poisonous to them because you were seen as having a hand in this. People in D.C., they know. The Republicans know. No one is pretending this was just a little riot that happened.
You know a lot more about this stuff than I do when it comes to lobbyists, but I don't think people have that much integrity. They only care if you can get who you know. I mean, who you know.
Legislation. You need to get regulations changed. And by the way, if you're a good lobbyist,
fine. She's not going to work as a lobbyist. She's going to be fine. She's going to write a book.
Yes, she'll be okay.
But the point is, she came forward, and he didn't come forward, and he's a much wealthier white male who'd been around and had a good reputation, and he didn't come forward till she did. And I think that is so telling.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, this is the problem with the modern GOP, is that even the guys, even many of the people who have integrity don't want to put their career in any sort of danger.
But I guess I'm arguing that they are. I don't, how are they putting their career in danger? Maybe in I don't know. I mean, who's not doing well that worked for Trump? All of them.
Well, but if these guys want to get invited to, remember there's access. There's not just, this isn't just about a paycheck.
I know, but there's other ways to do well outside of the Washington anything.
Yeah, but these guys clawed their way up to the
Sean Spicer was on fucking Dancing with the Stars and sold a book. I mean, you get speaking gigs. That's a pretty good life.
That means you're a fucking joker. I mean, these guys want access to real power and to be real insiders.
Certainly, you're right.
Less important to them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about Cipollone for sure. I guess I was thinking more about Hutchinson or Sean Spicer, but you're right. That's true. Got to be true of him.
And Cipollone is better than a lot of these guys, to be honest with you.
I mean,
he really is.
But like McMaster John is second chief of staff.
Yeah.
The Marine.
God. Yeah. Mukasey and Meadows is a cockroach. He's awful.
Yeah. Mark Meadows as well. That's a whole different.
Right. And so these guys are better, but they're still.
He thinks Mike Pence deserves it.
Yeah.
That's what Meadows said.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, Pete, it's the thing that it's my mantra that I repeat, and I'm going to sound like David Rothkopf or somebody saying this, but the way fascism succeeds is not because there's ever enough fascists. It's because there's enough opportunists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is, write that on my gravestone, because that is what's going on. It's not.
Well, but I know, but
Reddit was less of an opportunist than most.
That gives opportunists a really bad name. I've been an opportunist in my life, but just not a fascist as well.
You were just trying to get a spot, the prime spot at a comedy show, like on a Saturday night.
I wish, yeah. Well, yeah. That was the worst of it. No, but I sold out for that too. I would do whatever it took. But no, I know I'm just joking around about myself and injecting myself. Absolutely true, that quote, and that's exactly who you're saying Meadows is.
Yeah.
And so many others. I mean, so many others that have cozied up to Trump or anybody else powerful who are just so corrupt. I mean, that's what your good friend and have a great deal of respect for him. I know Mark Leibovich's new book is about.
Yeah, this fucking town. Yeah. Uh-huh. So I actually listened to Leibovich, and I thought he was pretty good. I just wish he was on that line 3 or 5 years earlier, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You didn't make that to me when you were criticizing him privately the other day to me in text, but I thought that and think that about so many people. I think about like a bunch of MSNBC people I know, including Katie Tur, who was covering the campaign and who was aghast at me when I called him a white supremacist, just aghast. And I thought it was, I was aghast that she was aghast. I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a great thing that I pointed out on my Twitter feed.
But she couldn't say it. She couldn't allow herself to say that because of her corporate
That's right. And these folks think that they are truth tellers, but they are actually members of institutions that make demands on them. And one of those demands is when we're making a lot of money from a particular thing, if you can kind of ignore the little fascist man behind the curtain, you probably should.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's sort of somebody at Sirius, who I won't name because I think she's fine, but she has Rick Perry on her show once in a while, and no one ever mentions that his farm was called like N something farm for a long time, or that he completely was kissing Trump's ass and willing to help him on January 6th, right? Or you have, like I'll give you another good example. New York Times just had an article recently, and this is what I said in my Twitter feed a couple days ago, and it was about how the whole article was, check it out, Herschel Walker managed to have an event where he did not, have another out of wedlock kid or put a gun to his own head or claim to be a federal agent that he wasn't. And that was the premise of the article. Like, here's the other dumb things he's done, but hey, check this out. He's really got a good team now. And that's fucking bizarre. That is bizarre. He literally managed to put one event together that he did not look like a crazy person who should be nowhere within reach of a fucking car, much less a Senate office. And the New York Times made a story about that.
All right. Well,
Right? Right?
All really interesting, and I'll let you go. I appreciate an hour of your time, man. As always, people love when you join me. I got a million more questions, but I'd love to hear from you after the hearings and whenever else, Bill. Thank you, my friend.
That was cool. I will try to stop by tomorrow night. And,
awesome. Yeah, we're gonna watch them live. So,
what's that?
We're gonna watch them live. I'll say tonight. I'll post this for.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I will try to stop by. I'm going out for drinks the night before this time. So finally, I will be around.
Well, we always miss you when you're not there. So glad when you are. All right, buddy. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
All right. Bill Boyle. There he goes. What'd you think? At Bill B in DC on Twitter. Go say hello, challenge him, question him, criticize, make fun of him, do whatever you want. He can take it. Big boy, Bill Boyle. Love him. And I think we'll see him tonight at the Hangout. I hope to see you tonight at the Hangout. And shout out to Tina Winsett, who suggested I interview Marissa Renee Lee about her book, Grief is Love. And we sat down yesterday. We talked a lot more than just grief. She was fantastic. And I'm going to put that on the Friday show. I think you're really, really going to love that conversation. She was just on with Dr. Jason Johnson on his podcast on Slate called A Word, and I did like almost an hour with her. It was really good. I cannot wait to share that with you tomorrow. If you're not supporting this podcast, my work with a paid subscription, please do. Independent media. It's free, but it ain't cheap. Work real hard on this show each and every day. Not only the interviews, but editing them and promoting them and posting them takes a long time. All of it to get it up and get relevant, thoughtful conversation with experts to you each and every day. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're one of those people. I want to talk to more listeners here on the record, on the pod, on the show. Looking forward to that. So maybe submit some ideas about yourself and what you'd love to talk about if you're a good talker. Looking forward to hearing from you. standupwithpete@gmail.com. John Carroll is one of our favorite listeners, subscribers. Hopefully we'll see him at the Hangout tonight. Last week, he played Karen Madison Goodnight on his keyboard. It was amazing. He's always amazing, like right now. Sing us out, John.
Begin, they had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment. If you stand up, all right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.